My twin sister called me sobbing from the floor of her mansion, begging for a way out of a 13-year nightmare. When I found out her wealthy husband had been using her name to hide his dirty money while convincing everyone she was crazy, I did not just get her out. I took her place. And by the time he realized he was sleeping next to a federal forensic accountant, it was far too late to save his empire. My name is Natalie, and at 33 years old, I never expected to be standing in a multi-million-dollar foyer pretending to be a battered wife. Sign this right now, or I am freezing every account you have and locking you out of this house tonight. The heavy stack of legal documents slammed against my chest before scattering across the imported marble floor. I looked up through the curtain of my hair, keeping my chin tucked down, exactly the way my twin sister Naomi always did when she was terrified. Standing over me was Kendrick, my 38-year-old brother-in-law. He was a prominent real estate CEO, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, but the ugly sneer on his face exposed the monster he truly was. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you have ever had to step in and destroy a toxic family member to protect someone you love, hit the like button and subscribe. You will definitely want to hear how I legally dismantled this man. Pick them up, Naomi. Kendrick commanded, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. I did not move fast enough for him, so he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging hard into the exact spot where a massive purple bruise was carefully painted onto my skin with theatrical makeup. I flinched, and this time the disgust coursing through my veins was entirely real. Do not test me today, he warned, leaning in close. I need the equity transfer for your childhood home signed and notarized by tomorrow morning. Your mother already agreed to it. So pick up the pen and sign the damn papers, or you will be sleeping on the streets with nothing but the clothes on your back. I slowly knelt on the cold marble, gathering the scattered pages. My hands trembled, perfectly mimicking the anxiety my sister had lived with for over a decade. But behind the fake tears welling in my eyes, my mind was moving at lightning speed, analyzing every single line of text on the documents he had just thrown at me. I am a forensic accountant specializing in federal financial crimes. I spend my days tracing offshore accounts and uncovering corporate fraud for the government. It took me exactly 4 seconds of scanning the first page to realize this was not a simple equity transfer. Kendrick was attempting to leverage the fully paid-off home my grandparents left to Naomi, using it as collateral for a massive commercial loan. Worse, the shell company listed as the borrower was completely untraceable, meaning he planned to take the cash, let the company default, and leave Naomi to take the fall when the bank foreclosed on her property. It was a textbook case of federal wire fraud and financial abuse. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Sign it," Kendrick snapped, tapping his expensive leather shoe against the floor impatiently. "I need the liquid capital for a new development project, and since you contribute absolutely nothing to this marriage, your signature is the least you can do." I let out a soft, pathetic sob, letting a tear slip down my cheek. "Please, Kendrick," I whispered, making my voice shake. "My mother lives in that house. If something goes wrong, where will she go?" He laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed in the massive, empty foyer. "Your mother is fine with it. She knows her place, and she knows I pay the bills around here. Stop being dramatic and sign the paper before I lose my temper." "You know what happens when I lose my temper, Naomi." The veiled threat hung heavy in the air. I nodded submissively, grabbing the gold-plated pen from his desk. I kept my head down, hiding the cold, calculated smile forming on my lips. Kendrick was so drunk on his own power, so convinced he had completely broken his wife's spirit, that he did not even look closely at what I was doing. I signed the document. But I did not forge Naomi's loopy, hesitant handwriting. I pressed the pen firmly into the paper and signed my own legal name, Natalie, with a sharp, distinct flourish at the end. By signing the wrong name, I instantly invalidated the contract, making it legally worthless to the bank. But more importantly, by accepting a document with my signature and attempting to submit it to a financial institution, Kendrick was actively committing a federal crime right into my trap. I stood up, keeping my shoulders hunched, and handed the stack back to him. He snatched it from my hands without a second glance. Was that so hard? He mocked, tucking the folder under his arm. See what happens when you actually cooperate. Now go fix your face. You look like a mess. I have investors to meet. I watched him turn his back and walk toward the massive oak front doors, entirely oblivious to the fact that he had just handed a federal investigator the very rope I would use to hang him. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of his pristine mansion. My fake tears vanished instantly. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand. The quiet of the house was oppressive. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of his obsessive control. There were no family photos on the walls. The minimalist decor was sterile and cold, chosen entirely by him. For 13 years, he had systematically isolated her from the world, convincing her she was worthless and entirely dependent on his wealth. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully trapped a bird in a gilded cage, but he had no idea the bird had escaped, and a predator had taken its place. I walked over to the front windows and peeked through the expensive silk blinds, watching his black SUV pull out of the long gated driveway. The moment the taillights disappeared down the street, I dropped the timid posture entirely. I had a narrow window of time before anyone else arrived, and I needed to gather as much evidence as humanly possible. Kendrick thought he held all the cards, but he was about to learn a brutal lesson about what happens when you cross a woman who knows exactly how to follow the money. I moved quickly through the cavernous living room and headed straight for his home office. Kendrick was predictable. Men who built their empires on fraud always needed a physical anchor for their arrogance. A place where they could look at the tangible proof of their lies. His office was a shrine to his own ego, with dark mahogany shelves and heavy leather furniture. The primary security panel on the wall blinked a steady red. I did not waste time trying to guess a birth date or an anniversary. Narcissists never use dates related to their wives. I punched in the incorporation date of his most profitable shell company. The light flashed green, and the system disarmed with a soft click. I walked over to the built-in bookcase on the far wall. Behind a framed photograph of Kendrick shaking hands with the local mayor was a hidden wall safe. It was a high-end model, with a digital keypad. He thought it was impenetrable. But as a forensic accountant, I spent my career dismantling the financial fortresses of men much smarter than him. Before taking my sister's place, I had brushed a thin layer of specialized clear powder over the keypad while pretending to clean his office the night before. Pulling a small ultraviolet light from my pocket, I illuminated the keys. 4 numbers showed bright glowing smudges: 2, 0, 1, and 9. 2019. The exact year he forced Naomi to sign away her voting rights in their joint holding company. I entered the numbers, and the heavy steel door popped open. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a highly secure encrypted scanning application. Inside the safe were 3 thick manila folders. I opened the first one, and my blood ran cold. It contained the original physical copies of Naomi's trust fund, the one our grandfather had set up specifically to be untouchable until she turned 35. Kendrick had somehow managed to forge a durable power of attorney and was actively draining the accounts. I looked at the routing numbers and recognized the pattern immediately. He was funneling her inheritance into an offshore holding company, registered in the Cayman Islands under a completely fake entity. He was systematically bleeding her dry while demanding she grovel for $50 to buy groceries. I grabbed the second folder and opened it upon the massive wooden desk. This one was far more sinister than simple financial theft. It was a drafted psychological evaluation. I scanned the pages quickly, reading the fabricated medical notes provided by a doctor who was clearly on Kendrick's payroll. The document detailed severe paranoia, erratic behavior, and violent outbursts that never happened. He was building a fake medical history, a completely fabricated paper trail to have my sister declared mentally unfit. If he succeeded, he would gain full permanent conservatorship over her life. He could legally lock her in a psychiatric facility, throw away the key, and gain absolute legal control over every dime she ever owned. He was not just stealing her money, he was trying to erase her existence entirely. My hands shook not from fear, but from a deep white-hot rage. I placed the documents flat on the desk and rapidly scanned every single page. The application uploaded the files directly to a secure federal server. If anything happened to me, the evidence was already in the hands of my investigative team back in New York. I returned the folders to the safe exactly as I had found them. Every paper was aligned perfectly to the millimeter. I closed the heavy steel door, spun the dial, and wiped down the keypad, erasing any trace I had ever been there. I was just turning away from the bookcase to restore the security system when I heard the distinct heavy sound of a key turning in the brass lock of the front door. My heart pounded fiercely against my ribs. Kendrick had told me he would be gone meeting investors all day. I quickly smoothed down my oversized sweater and pinched my cheeks hard to recreate the flushed, tear-stained look of a terrified victim. I hurried out of the office and silently closed the door behind me. The heavy oak front door creaked open, and the sharp, confident click of designer high heels echoed against the marble floor of the foyer. "Naomi, are you hiding in here?" a voice called out. It was not Kendrick. It was the one person whose betrayal cut deeper than anything else. It was our mother, Diana. I stepped out into the hallway, keeping my head bowed and my shoulders slumped in a posture of complete defeat. Diana stood in the entryway, clutching a handbag that cost more than most people made in a solid year. She did not look worried about her daughter. She looked utterly annoyed. I stood there waiting for her to say something maternal, something a mother should say to a daughter who was clearly in distress. Instead, she sighed heavily and tossed her keys onto the entryway table. The keys were attached to a brand-new leather keychain with a gleaming silver Mercedes logo. "Naomi, really must you always look so miserable," she said, shaking her head in disgust. "Kendrick called me on his way to his office. He said you were being difficult again about signing those simple loan papers. I honestly do not understand why you have to make everything into a massive battle." I kept my head down, playing the part of the broken bird. This was the woman who gave birth to us. The woman who stood by and watched Kendrick systematically destroy her daughter's life because he kept her dripping in expensive gifts. "You know, he just bought me a brand new S-Class this morning," she bragged, smoothing down her designer dress. "Paid in full. The man is a saint, Naomi. A literal saint for putting up with your constant neediness. You were always like this, even when you were a little girl. Always a burden, always needing too much attention. Not like your sister. Natalie actually made something of herself. But you got lucky that a man like Kendrick was willing to take care of you, and this is how you repay him, by throwing tantrums over a piece of paper." I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing in her face. If she only knew the successful sister she was praising was the one currently standing in front of her, mentally calculating the exact length of the prison sentence she was going to serve for receiving stolen funds. "I am sorry, Mom," I whispered, forcing my voice to quiver. "I will make some tea. Please sit down." I walked into the massive custom kitchen and filled the electric kettle. I needed a moment to steady my hands, not from anxiety, but from the sheer adrenaline of having my target so blissfully unaware. Diana followed me, sitting at the marble island and crossing her legs. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact was purchased using funds siphoned from Naomi's inheritance. "You really need to fix your attitude," she continued, entirely oblivious to my silence. "Kendrick provides a beautiful life for you. Do you want to end up alone? Because if you keep pushing him, he will leave you. And I certainly do not have the room or the patience to take you back into my house." I poured the boiling water into 2 delicate porcelain cups. I dropped a chamomile tea bag into hers and pushed it across the smooth marble counter. I looked up, and for a brief second, I let my real posture show. I straightened my shoulders and looked her dead in the eyes. "It is a beautiful car, Mom," I said. "I saw it out the window." I kept my voice soft but stripped away the tremor. It was calm and steady. "Kendrick bought it from the luxury dealership on Westheimer Right." She took a sip of her tea and nodded proudly. "Yes, he did. The general manager personally handed me the keys. VIP treatment, of course." "That is so nice," I said, taking a slow sip of my own tea. "You should probably make sure the title is completely clear, though, and keep the dealership receipts somewhere safe. Preferably not in the car." Diana frowned, lowering her cup. "What on earth are you talking about, Naomi? Why would I need to do that?" "Oh, I was just watching the morning news before you got here," I lied smoothly, weaving the trap. "It seems the IRS Criminal Investigation Division raided that exact dealership yesterday. Something about the owner taking large cash payments from real estate developers to clean dirty money. They are seizing all the assets from the last 6 months. Anyone who bought a luxury vehicle there in cash is being subpoenaed for a federal tax audit." I paused, letting the words hang in the silent kitchen before delivering the final blow. If they find out the car was bought with undeclared funds, they do not just take the car back. They freeze the bank accounts of the registered owner, which would be you. I watched the color completely drain from my mother's face. The proud, arrogant smirk melted into an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. Her hand began to shake so badly, the tea spilled over the rim of the porcelain cup and stained the white marble counter. "An audit," she stammered, her voice suddenly shrill and desperate. "But Kendrick paid for it. They cannot come after me. My name is just on the registration. The federal government does not care, Mom," I said, offering her a sweet, empty smile. "They just follow the paper trail. And right now that trail leads directly to your driveway. But I am sure Kendrick the Saint has it all under control. You should definitely ask him about it tonight." Diana stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The seed of doubt was planted. And the beautiful part was that the IRS raid I mentioned was entirely real. I knew about it because I was the forensic accountant who had signed off on the federal warrant 3 days ago in my New York office. Kendrick's dealership connection was just the beginning of his money laundering operation. And my mother, driven by her own shallow greed, had just unwittingly driven a massive piece of federal evidence right to my doorstep. She quickly grabbed her designer handbag, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the clasp. "I need to make a phone call," she muttered, barely able to form a coherent sentence. She practically ran out of the kitchen, abandoning her tea and leaving the stain to dry on the marble. I listened to the frantic clicking of her heels retreating down the hallway, followed by the heavy slam of the front door. I took another calm sip of my tea. Step 1 was complete. I had successfully turned the enabler against the abuser. Panic makes criminals sloppy, and Diana was about to demand answers from Kendrick that he could not possibly provide without exposing his own lies. I smiled into my cup. The dominoes were finally starting to fall. The afternoon faded into a tense evening. I spent the next few hours preparing a lavish dinner just the way Kendrick demanded it in his texts. I needed to play the role of the obedient wife flawlessly. At exactly 7 o'clock, the heavy front door opened. I heard Kendrick's booming voice echoing in the foyer, followed by a high-pitched giggle that definitely did not belong to my mother. I wiped my hands on an apron and walked out of the kitchen, keeping my head slightly bowed. Kendrick was standing by the entryway, taking off his suit jacket. Next to him was a young woman who could not have been older than 24. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress and clutching a bright orange handbag. Naomi Kendrick barked, not even looking at me. "This is Brittany. She is my new interior design consultant. She will be joining us for dinner. Set another plate." I nodded meekly. "Nice to meet you, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice soft and unsure. Brittany looked me up and down. Her lips curled into a condescending smirk. She took in my oversized sweater and messy hair. "So, this is the wife," she said. Her voice was dripping with pity. "Kendrick, you did not tell me she was so drab." No wonder you spend so much time at the office. Kendrick laughed a cruel sound that made my stomach turn. He did not defend his wife. He just agreed with his mistress. She has let herself go, he said, waving a hand in my direction. That is why I need you here, Brittany. This whole house needs a massive upgrade. The energy is just dead. I swallowed my anger. It was sickening how blatantly he paraded this girl in Naomi's home. He was intentionally trying to break her spirit by bringing his mistress into her sanctuary. But I was not Naomi. I will get the dinner ready, I whispered, turning back to the dining room. 10 minutes later, they were seated at the massive mahogany dining table. Brittany placed her bright orange handbag right on the table next to her plate. It was supposed to be an exclusive designer bag, a status symbol that cost upwards of $20,000. She kept resting her hand on it, making sure I noticed it. This dining room is entirely too dark, Brittany said, poking at her salad. The drapes are atrocious. Honestly, Naomi, did you pick these out yourself? They look like they belong in a cheap motel. I picked them out, Kendrick said, his tone suddenly defensive. Oh well, they just need a woman's touch. Brittany quickly backpedaled, placing a manicured hand on his arm. I can fix it, Kendrick. I have amazing vision. I can make this place look like a billionaire actually lives here instead of a desperate housewife. I walked over to the table carrying an expensive bottle of red wine. It was a vintage Bordeaux, dark and heavily pigmented. I kept my hands trembling slightly, acting nervous around the confident younger woman. Would you like some wine, Brittany? I asked softly. Obviously, she sneered, rolling her eyes. Just do not spill it on me. This dress costs more than your entire wardrobe. I stepped closer to her chair. I held the heavy glass bottle in my right hand. I leaned in to pour the wine into her crystal glass. I made sure to position myself right next to her obnoxious orange handbag. Oh, I am so sorry, I stammered, my foot deliberately catching the edge of the thick dining room rug. I lunged forward. I did not just drop the bottle. I tipped the entire thing forward, pouring at least 2 full glasses worth of dark crimson wine directly onto the bright orange leather of her handbag. The dark liquid splashed everywhere, completely soaking the bag and splattering onto her expensive dress. Brittany let out an ear-piercing shriek. She jumped up from the table, pushing her chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. My bag, she screamed, grabbing the dripping wet purse. My designer bag! You stupid, clumsy woman! Do you know how much this costs? It is ruined. Kendrick slammed his hands on the table, standing up furiously. Naomi? What is wrong with you? He yelled, his face turning red with anger. Are you completely incompetent? I immediately dropped to my knees, grabbing a cloth napkin and dabbing frantically at the bag in Brittany's hands. Oh my God, I am so incredibly sorry. I cried, my voice thick with fake panic. Let me help you clean it. Please let me help. Get away from me, Brittany shrieked, yanking the bag away. But as I grabbed the flap of the bag, I pulled hard on the interior lining. I pulled the seam entirely inside out, exposing the inner edge to the bright dining room chandelier. I stopped dabbing. I let out a loud, dramatic gasp of relief. Oh, thank goodness, I said, letting out a long breath and wiping my forehead. I thought I ruined a real one. We are so lucky. Lucky, Brittany snapped, her face flushed with rage. It is real, you idiot! Kendrick bought it for me in Paris. I stood up, holding the wet napkin, and looked directly at Kendrick with wide, innocent eyes. Oh no, Kendrick, I think you got scammed, I said loudly, making sure my voice echoed in the large room. Look right here at the interior stitching. The authentic brand uses a saddle stitch with waxed linen thread, but this is clearly glued together with cheap synthetic polyester. And the hardware stamp is painted on, not engraved. The dye is already bleeding from the wine. Real leather does not bleed color like that. The dining room went dead silent. Brittany looked down at the bag in her hands. The orange dye was literally melting off the cheap synthetic material, leaving ugly white streaks. It was undeniable. The bag was a massive, cheap counterfeit. I looked back at Kendrick. His jaw was clenched so tight a vein was pulsing in his neck. He was a man who prided himself on wealth and status. He used expensive things to manipulate the women in his life. And I had just exposed him as a cheap fraud right in front of his arrogant little mistress. "You bought me a fake," Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with completely different tears now. "You told me you spent $25,000 on this. You said I was worth it." "Brittany, shut up," Kendrick hissed, grabbing her arm. "Let us go to the kitchen and clean this up." He dragged her out of the dining room, leaving a trail of cheap orange dye and red wine across his perfect marble floor. I stood alone in the dining room and picked up the empty wine bottle. I took a deep breath of the rich grape scent. The house needed a massive upgrade, she had said. I completely agreed. I was upgrading it by taking out the trash. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Kendrick had not spoken a single word to me since he dragged his ruined mistress out the front door, leaving a trail of cheap orange dye and red wine across his perfect marble floor. He had locked himself in his office all night. I knew he was furious, but I also knew men like him never just get angry. They get even. They retaliate by tightening the leash. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the grand foyer. Kendrick emerged from his office looking perfectly put together in a sharp navy suit, as if the humiliation of the previous night had never happened. He opened the door to reveal a short, balding man carrying a worn leather briefcase. The man had the nervous, shifting eyes of someone who was constantly looking over his shoulder. He did not look like a respected medical professional. He looked like a man who sold favors for cash. Kendrick led him straight into the formal living room and ordered me to sit down on the sofa. "Naomi, this is Dr. Harrison," Kendrick said, his voice suddenly dripping with fake syrupy concern. "I asked him to come by to check on you. We need to talk about your recent behavior." I recognized that name instantly. Dr. Harrison was the exact name printed at the top of the fabricated psychological evaluation I had photographed inside Kendrick's wall safe yesterday. The trap was officially springing shut. Kendrick was not wasting any time. The incident with his mistress had accelerated his timeline. He wanted the paper trail of my sister's insanity established immediately so he could seize her remaining trust fund. I slipped my right hand into the deep pocket of my oversized cardigan. My thumb traced the edge of my smartphone, finding the volume button. With 2 quick presses, I activated the secure audio recording application I had configured specifically for this moment. The microphone was now capturing every single word spoken in the room, securely backing it up to a federal cloud server. "Please sit down, Naomi," Dr. Harrison said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. He did not ask for my consent. He did not ask how I was feeling. He just opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick, yellow notepad. "Your husband has expressed some deep concerns about your mental state. He tells me you had a severe manic episode last night. He said you became violent toward a guest and deliberately destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property." I looked at Kendrick. He was standing by the stone fireplace, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken husband perfectly. He sighed heavily and rubbed his temples, looking down at the floor. "She is completely out of control," Dr. Kendrick lied smoothly. "She is paranoid. She thinks everyone is out to get her. She is destroying things. I am terrified she is going to hurt herself or someone else." It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. If Naomi had been sitting here, she would have been sobbing desperately, trying to defend herself against these horrific lies. That was exactly how the trap worked. If you argue back aggressively, you look erratic and unstable. If you stay quiet and cry, you look catatonic and guilty. Either way, the abuser wins. So I played a different game. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around my legs. I rocked slightly back and forth, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, acting like a cornered animal. "I am just so tired," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I did not mean to spill the wine. I am just clumsy. Please do not be mad at me. Spilling wine is a simple accident," Naomi the doctor said, his tone condescending and sharp. "Kendrick tells me you intentionally attacked his colleague. Have you been hearing voices, Naomi? Do you often feel detached from reality?" He was asking heavily loaded questions, feeding me the exact symptoms required to justify a severe psychiatric diagnosis. I gave vague, frightened answers, dodging his attempts to verbally corner me. But Dr. Harrison did not care about my answers. He was not there to conduct a genuine medical diagnosis. He was there to deliver a predetermined product. After barely 10 minutes of this absolute sham of an interview, Dr. Harrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a prescription pad. "I think it is very clear what we are dealing with here, Kendrick," he said, unclicking his silver pen. "She is suffering from severe paranoia and dangerous manic delusions. I am going to write a prescription for a heavy-grade antipsychotic. She needs to be heavily sedated to prevent further violent outbursts." Kendrick nodded solemnly, crossing his arms. "I just want my wife to be safe, doctor. Whatever it takes. Even if I have to force her to take it." I watched the doctor bring the tip of the pen down toward the paper. Once his ink touched that pad, my sister would officially have a permanent medical record of severe mental illness. That single piece of paper was the final key Kendrick needed to petition the court for full conservatorship. He would have total legal control over her body and her bank accounts forever. I could not let that pen touch the paper. I stopped rocking. I uncrossed my arms and slowly lifted my head. The act was over. "Dr. Harrison," I said, my voice dropping 2 octaves, losing every trace of the fragile tremor. "I would think very carefully before you sign your name on that prescription pad." The doctor paused, his pen hovering just an inch above the yellow paper. He frowned, looking confused by the sudden change in my tone. Kendrick stiffened, his eyes narrowing. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I looked directly into the doctor's nervous, shifting eyes. "You are wearing a knockoff Rolex, doctor." The sweeping second hand stutters every few seconds. "Your suit jacket is frayed at the cuffs, and you have a slight tremor in your left hand, which usually indicates severe stress or a looming financial deadline. Men who take under the table cash for illegal medical evaluations do not do it because they are successful. They do it because they are desperate." Dr. Harrison's face went completely pale. He pulled his pen away from the paper. "What is she talking about, Kendrick?" he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "She is delusional," Kendrick snapped, stepping forward defensively. "I told you she makes things up. Ignore her and write the prescription right now." I smiled a cold, predatory smile. "If you write that prescription for heavy-grade antipsychotics without conducting a legally mandated psychiatric hold and without any prior medical history, you are committing medical fraud. And when the Drug Enforcement Administration audits your prescribing history, because trust me, they will, if this goes to family court, they will find a pattern of kickbacks. They will subpoena your bank records. They will see the cash deposits Kendrick has been making to your offshore accounts to secure fake medical documents." I stood up, slowly smoothing down my oversized cardigan. "I am a forensic accountant, doctor. I profile financial criminals for a living. I know exactly what a desperate man looks like. You are risking 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit medical fraud and unlawful restraint. Is Kendrick paying you enough to lose your medical license and spend the rest of your life in a federal cell?" Harrison started sweating profusely. Drops of perspiration gathered on his balding forehead. He threw the prescription pad back into his worn leather briefcase, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He did not say a single word to me. He just looked at Kendrick with absolute terror in his eyes. "I cannot do this," he muttered, snapping the briefcase shut. "I am not getting involved in a federal investigation, Kendrick. You told me she was a standard hysterical housewife. You did not tell me she was legally competent and tracking my finances. Get back here and write the damn script," Kendrick roared, grabbing the doctor by the shoulder. "I paid you $10,000 for this evaluation. You work for me. Keep the money," Harrison said, shoving Kendrick's hand away with surprising force. He practically sprinted toward the front door, leaving his expensive umbrella behind in his desperate rush to escape. The heavy front door slammed shut, echoing loudly through the silent house. Kendrick slowly turned around to face me. The mask of the concerned husband was entirely gone, replaced by a look of pure, unhinged malice. For 13 years he had controlled what Naomi wore, what she ate, and who she spoke to. Hearing her speak with the clinical coldness of a federal investigator completely shattered his reality. "What the hell did you just do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with an explosive rage. "How do you know about his malpractice history? How do you know about the offshore accounts, Naomi?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "You said I was paranoid, Kendrick. Maybe I just have an active imagination." He lunged at me. He grabbed me by the upper arms, his fingers digging into my skin with terrifying force. He did not drag me by the hair, but his grip was brutal enough to leave real bruises this time. He pulled me toward the grand sweeping staircase, ignoring my calculated protests. "You think you are smart?" he snarled, dragging me up the stairs. "You think you can outplay me in my own house? You are nothing without me. You are insane, and nobody will ever believe a word you say." He shoved me hard into the master bedroom. I stumbled and fell onto the plush carpet. Before I could stand up, he snatched the smartphone out of my cardigan pocket. "You are not talking to anyone," he spat, glaring down at me. "You are going to sit in this room until you beg me for mercy. No phone, no internet. Nobody is coming to save you." He stepped backward into the hallway and slammed the heavy oak door. I heard the distinct metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. He had locked me in. I sat on the floor listening to his heavy footsteps storming back down the stairs. The house fell completely silent again. I was locked in a room on the second floor, completely cut off from the outside world. To anyone else, this would be a moment of absolute despair. But I did not panic. I did not cry. I calmly stood up, brushed the dust off my clothes, and walked over to the attached master bathroom. Kendrick thought he had taken my only lifeline when he confiscated the phone from my pocket. He vastly underestimated the woman he was dealing with. I locked the bathroom door behind me, just as a precaution. The master bathroom was a massive expanse of white marble and glass, designed to look like a high-end spa. I walked past the oversized soaking tub and knelt in front of the floating dual vanity. I reached underneath the heavy stone counter, my fingers tracing the slick surface of the plumbing pipes, until I felt the rough edge of industrial waterproof tape. I peeled it back and a small black plastic bag dropped into the palm of my hand. Inside was a cheap prepaid burner phone, fully charged and loaded with minutes. I had taped it there on my very first day in the house, knowing Kendrick would eventually try to cut off my communication. Control freaks always follow the same playbook. First they isolate, then they confiscate. But you cannot isolate someone who has already built a backdoor. I powered on the device and dialed a private New York number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. It was David, my lead counsel, and one of the most ruthless financial attorneys on the East Coast. We had worked together on dozens of federal fraud cases, and he knew exactly why I had gone off the grid to protect my twin sister. "It is Natalie," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "He just confiscated my primary phone and tried to bring in a fake psychiatrist to have Naomi committed. The timeline is accelerating. We need to move to the offensive phase right now." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. "Tell me what you need." David said, his tone strictly business. "I need you to liquidate my personal investment portfolios," I instructed, walking over to the bathroom window and staring out at the manicured lawn. "Cash out the mutual funds, the tech stocks, and the private index funds. I need maximum liquid capital immediately." "Natalie, that is your entire safety net," David warned. "You will take a massive penalty for early withdrawal on some of those accounts. Are you absolutely sure about this?" "I am positive," I replied without hesitation. "Do not worry about the penalties. I am going to make Kendrick pay for every single cent of it. Once the funds are cleared, I want you to create an anonymous holding company in Delaware. I want the LLC completely insulated. Use proxy directors so my name never appears on the registry until the trap snaps shut. Use that entity to quietly buy up all the toxic debt attached to Kendrick's real estate shell companies. I listened as David typed out the instructions. Kendrick thinks he is a genius because he shifted all his liabilities into corporate entities, I explained. But those entities are drowning in high-interest loans. If we buy that debt, I legally become his primary creditor. When I eventually freeze his illegal offshore accounts, he will default on the loans. And when he defaults, my holding company gets to foreclose on his entire commercial portfolio. I want Kendrick to wake up one morning and realize an invisible entity just called in all his debts at once. He will scramble to move his stolen cash from the Cayman Islands to cover the margins, and that is exactly when the federal wire fraud alarms will trigger. Consider it done, David said. We will start the acquisitions by noon. What else? There is a complication, I added, leaning against the cool marble wall. He brought a young woman to the house last night. Her name is Brittany. She claims to be his interior design consultant, but she is obviously his mistress. Kendrick bought her a $25,000 bag that turned out to be a cheap counterfeit. He is lying to her about his wealth, just like he lies to everyone else. You want me to run a full background check on her, David asked. I want a deep dive, I corrected. Leave no stone unturned. Check her credit history, her tax returns, her social media aliases, and any civil judgments against her. Find out where she lives. If Kendrick is paying for her apartment, I want the lease agreement. Look for any shell companies or bank accounts opened in her name recently. Men like Kendrick never just cheat. They use their mistresses as financial mules. If he is funneling money through her, I want the account numbers. I want to know her vulnerabilities before she even realizes she is part of this game. I will put our best private investigators on it immediately, David assured me. Are you safe in that house, Natalie? If he is escalating his behavior, you need to be careful. I am perfectly safe, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. He locked me in the bedroom because he thinks it will break my spirit. He thinks I am sitting on the floor crying right now. He has absolutely no idea that I just bought his debt and put a target on his mistress. I hung up the burner phone and powered it down. I wrapped it back in the plastic bag and taped it securely under the sink. I splashed some cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. Kendrick wanted a war of attrition. He wanted to slowly starve me out and watch me crumble. But he was playing checkers while I was playing a multi-million-dollar game of financial chess. He thought locking the door gave him power. He did not realize he had just locked himself in the cage with me. The heavy deadbolt clicked open the next morning at exactly 7. The solid oak door swung wide to reveal Kendrick holding a cup of black coffee and wearing a smug, victorious smile. He looked down at me, expecting to see a broken woman shattered by a night of solitary confinement. I made sure to give him exactly what he wanted. I sat on the edge of the bed, hugging my knees, keeping my eyes cast downward in a display of absolute submission. You look exhausted, he said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. I hope you use the time to reflect on your behavior. I nodded slowly, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. I am sorry, Kendrick. I just want things to go back to normal. Normal? He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Normal is over, Naomi. I am taking complete control of the finances effective immediately. I canceled all of your credit cards last night. I froze the grocery delivery accounts, and I revoked your access to the joint checking. If you want a single dime from me from now on, you will have to convince me you actually deserve it. He turned and walked downstairs, leaving the door open. It was a classic abuser tactic. Financial starvation. Strip away the basic necessities of life to force complete dependency. I waited 10 minutes before following him down to the kitchen. The refrigerator was entirely empty except for a few condiments. He had actually cleared out the food while I was locked upstairs. I walked to the doorway of his home office. He was sitting behind his massive desk, reviewing blueprints. I wrapped my oversized cardigan tighter around myself and cleared my throat. Kendrick, I murmured, keeping my head bowed. There is no food in the house. I need to go to the grocery store. He did not look up from his papers. How is that my problem? He asked coldly. Please, I pleaded, forcing a desperate edge into my tone. I just need $50 to buy some basic groceries for the week. I will make whatever you want for dinner. Just please let me buy some food. He finally looked up, his eyes shining with absolute power. He was feeding on my humiliation. He loved seeing his wife reduced to a beggar in her own home. He slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He extracted a crisp $50 bill and held it between his fingers. Say, please, Kendrick, he demanded, his voice dripping with condescension. Please, Kendrick, I whispered, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. He tossed the bill onto the floor right at my feet. I slowly bent down and picked it up, my hands shaking. Thank you, I said softly. Do not spend it all in one place, he sneered, going back to his blueprints. I walked out of the office and headed straight for the garage. I climbed into the modest sedan he allowed Naomi to drive and pulled out of the gated driveway. But I did not turn left toward the local high-end grocery store. I turned right and merged onto the highway, heading straight for the financial district downtown. 30 minutes later, I pulled up to a massive glass and steel building. It was not a standard retail bank. It was a regional hub for a major international financial institution, the exact institution Kendrick used to route his corporate funds before sending them offshore. I walked through the revolving doors and bypassed the regular teller line. I approached a secure glass desk designated for corporate accounts and flashed a small metal badge I kept hidden inside my wallet. It was my federal forensic accounting credential. The branch manager, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, immediately sat up straighter. How can I help you, ma'am? She asked, lowering her voice. I need to file a formal suspicious activity report, I said, sliding quietly into the chair opposite her. I am tracking a high-level money laundering operation, and I have direct knowledge of unverified offshore wire transfers bypassing federal oversight. The manager pulled out a secure tablet and opened the encrypted reporting system. I need the routing numbers and the destination accounts. She said, her fingers poised over the screen. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, recalling the exact string of numbers I had memorized from the documents inside Kendrick's wall safe. I recited them flawlessly. I gave her the corporate routing numbers, the Cayman Islands holding company details, and the exact dates of the illegal transfers. Filing a suspicious activity report is not just a suggestion to the federal government. It is a mandatory trigger. Once a verified federal investigator initiates an SAR, the system automatically freezes the flagged accounts for 72 hours pending a full audit by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The manager hit submit and the screen flashed green. The report is filed and active, she confirmed, sliding a physical confirmation receipt across the desk. I took the receipt and folded it neatly into my pocket. Kendrick thought he had starved me out by withholding $50 for groceries. He had no idea that while he was sitting in his office feeling like a god, I had just effectively frozen $15 million of his stolen assets. I walked out of the bank, the $50 bill still sitting untouched in my pocket. Let him enjoy his power trip today, because by tomorrow his entire empire was going to hit a brick wall. I drove back to the house feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. When I walked through the door, Kendrick was already dressed in his golf attire. He looked at me with absolute disdain. You have a luncheon at the country club with my sister Jasmine in an hour, he commanded. Do not embarrass me, and do not speak unless spoken to. I want everyone to see my perfect happy wife. I nodded submissively and went upstairs to change. Jasmine was Kendrick's younger sister. She was just as arrogant as him, but completely blind to his true nature. She worshipped the ground he walked on and despised Naomi. To Jasmine, my sister was nothing but a fragile gold digger leeching off her brother's hard-earned wealth. An hour later, I pulled into the valet circle of the exclusive Oak Creek Country Club. The dining patio was filled with wealthy women sipping champagne and picking at expensive salads. I spotted Jasmine sitting at a prime corner table. She was wearing a designer sundress and tapping her manicured nails impatiently. I walked over and sat down across from her. She did not bother saying hello. You look terrible, Naomi, she sneered immediately. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I am just tired, Jasmine, I said softly. Tired of what exactly? She snapped, her voice rising loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Tired of sitting in a mansion all day while my brother works himself to the bone to provide for you. You are completely ungrateful. You contribute absolutely nothing to this marriage. Several women at the adjacent tables turned to look. Jasmine thrived on the audience. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with spite. Kendrick told me about your little psychotic episode yesterday, she continued loudly. Breaking things in the house. Refusing to take your medication. You are a liability, Naomi. My brother is a successful black man building an empire, and you are just a crazy woman trying to drag him down. You are nothing but a gold digger, and if I had my way, he would have divorced you years ago. I let her finish. I let the silence hang in the air, while the other women whispered and stared. I did not cry. I did not shrink back in my chair. Instead, I calmly unzipped my leather tote bag. Before leaving the bank, I had David, my attorney, courier over a few specific documents I requested. I pulled out a thin manila folder and slid it across the white tablecloth, stopping right next to her untouched mimosa. What is this? She asked, rolling her eyes. More of your paranoid delusions. I think you should open it, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. It is a gift. Jasmine snatched the folder and flipped it open. She expected to see something ridiculous. But as her eyes scanned the top page, the arrogant sneer completely vanished from her face. Her perfectly manicured fingers started to tremble. That is a summary report from the Delaware State Registry, I explained, leaning forward so only she could hear. 2 commercial real estate shell companies, both registered entirely in your name, both currently holding over $3 million in defaulted high-interest debt. Jasmine swallowed hard, her eyes darting across the pages. I did not open these, she whispered, her voice suddenly fragile. I do not even know what this is. I know you did not, I said, taking a slow sip of my water. But your brother did. He used your social security number and your signature from those tax documents you let him handle for you last year. He needed a clean name to absorb his toxic liabilities, so he chose his loyal little sister. You let him handle your personal taxes because you thought he was a financial genius. Instead, he forged your signature and named you the sole director of 2 corporations that do nothing but bleed money. She looked up at me, her face completely drained of color. He would never do that to me, she stammered. I am his sister. He built his entire business to take care of our family. He built his business to take care of himself. Jasmine, I said coldly. He feeds on anyone who trusts him, and right now those lenders are preparing to file massive civil suits to recoup their money. When they do, they are not going to sue Kendrick because his name is nowhere on those corporate charters. They are going to sue the legal owner of the companies. They are going to take your house, your business, your car, and every single dollar in your bank account. You will be completely bankrupt by the end of the month. Jasmine looked back down at the folder, breathing heavily. The women at the other tables were still watching, but the dynamic had completely shifted. The loud, arrogant sister was now visibly hyperventilating over a piece of paper. You called me a gold digger, Jasmine, I said, standing up from the table. But the truth is, your brother is the one stealing from the women in his life. You have exactly 24 hours to hire a very good defense attorney before those foreclosure notices hit your mailbox. Enjoy your lunch. I turned and walked away from the table, leaving her sitting there frozen in absolute terror. The country club patio was silent as I made my way to the exit. Kendrick had relied on his sister to be his most vocal defender and his ultimate shield, but I had just handed her the very sword she needed to cut him down. His inner circle was rapidly collapsing, and the main event was still yet to come. The drive back from the country club was quiet. I needed that silence to prepare for the most physically demanding performance of this entire operation. I knew Kendrick had the mansion wired. When I swept the house during my first night, I found hidden micro cameras tucked inside the living room smoke detectors, the kitchen clock, and the entryway chandelier. He monitored Naomi like a warden watching a prisoner. It was time to give him the exact show he wanted to see. I parked the car in the garage and walked inside. The house was empty. Kendrick was still downtown at his corporate office. I walked straight into the formal living room, knowing exactly where the camera blind spots were located. Just out of frame from the smoke detector camera, there was a heavy mahogany side table. I slipped my encrypted laptop out of my tote bag and set it down in the shadows. Earlier that week, I had plugged a tiny rogue drive into his home network router. It gave me a backdoor directly into his private corporate server. I opened my laptop and initiated a massive file transfer. I was pulling down his entire encrypted client list, the holy grail of his money laundering operation, and routing it straight to an FBI secure drop. A progress bar appeared on my screen. It was a massive file containing a decade of illegal offshore transactions. It would take exactly 12 minutes to complete. 12 minutes is a long time for a massive data spike to go unnoticed on a corporate network. If Kendrick checked his security logs, he would see the breach instantly. I needed a distraction. I needed him glued to the hidden camera feed and completely ignoring everything else on his monitors. I took a deep breath, stepping out of the blind spot and directly into the center of the living room. I let my shoulders collapse. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged, and then I let out a blood-curdling scream. It was not a delicate cry. It was the raw, guttural shriek of a woman completely losing her mind. I grabbed my own hair, pulling hard enough to make my scalp sting. I stumbled blindly toward the fireplace, crying hysterically. I knew Kendrick got motion alerts on his phone the second the cameras picked up rapid movement. I knew he was sitting in his plush office chair right now, pulling up the live feed. I cannot do this anymore, I screamed at the empty room, dropping to my knees. I cannot take it. I crawled toward a display shelf filled with decorative vases. I had already checked the bottoms of these vases on day one. They were cheap imported knockoffs Kendrick bought in bulk to make the room look full. I grabbed a heavy blue vase and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the stone fireplace with a deafening crash, sending sharp ceramic shards flying across the expensive rug. I grabbed another one, throwing it against the hardwood floor. I trashed the display, sobbing uncontrollably, tearing at my clothes and thrashing on the ground. I acted completely unhinged, completely broken. To anyone watching, I was a textbook case of severe paranoid psychosis. I was giving him exactly what he needed for his fake medical file. Across town, in his corner office, Kendrick was undoubtedly watching the high-definition feed on his monitor. He was probably leaning back in his leather chair, sipping a glass of expensive scotch, with a smug, satisfied smile on his face. He thought the pressure of the frozen credit cards and the luncheon with Jasmine had finally pushed his fragile wife over the edge. He thought he had won. He thought he had completely shattered my sanity. I kept up the hysterical crying for 10 straight minutes. My throat was raw and my hands were stinging from hitting the floor. I wept about how unfair everything was, begging for it to stop playing the ultimate victim. Every move was calculated to keep his eyes locked on the screen of his phone and away from his network security alerts. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the screen of my laptop resting in the blind spot. The green progress bar slowly crawled toward the edge of the window. 98%. 99%. 100%. A tiny green checkmark flashed on the screen, confirming the entire encrypted client list was safely locked in federal custody. The data spike ended. The network went quiet. The moment the transfer completed, my hysterical sobbing stopped instantly. I did not taper off. I just shut the emotion down like a machine flipping a switch. I stood up from the floor, surrounded by shattered ceramics. I calmly smoothed down my hair and brushed the dust off my knees. I walked over to the side table, picked up my laptop, and slipped it back into my tote bag. I looked directly into the smoke detector camera for one brief second, offering a cold, deadpan stare before walking out of the room. He thought he was watching a mental breakdown. He had no idea he was actually watching the precise moment his empire was handed over to the federal government. I went up to the master bedroom and splashed cold water on my face, making sure my eyes remained red and puffy. The performance had to continue. A few hours later, the heavy sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. I heard two distinct sets of footsteps. Kendrick had not come home alone. "Naomi, come down here," Kendrick called out. His voice was no longer furious. It was calm and terrifyingly gentle. The voice of a man who believed he had completely won. I walked slowly down the sweeping staircase, keeping my head down and my shoulders hunched. Kendrick was standing in the foyer next to a tall man with slicked-back hair and an expensive gray suit. The man carried a thick leather briefcase. He had the cold, indifferent eyes of a corporate lawyer who made his living destroying people. "Naomi, this is Mr. Preston," Kendrick said, gesturing to the man. "We watched the security footage of your little episode this afternoon. It is very clear that your mental health is rapidly deteriorating. I cannot in good conscience allow you to manage your own affairs anymore. It is too dangerous for you and for our assets." I wrapped my arms around myself, acting completely defeated. "I am fine," I whispered, staring at the marble floor. "I was just upset." "You were completely out of your mind," Mr. Preston countered, his tone sharply. "Clinical. Your husband is trying to protect you. We have drawn up some paperwork to ensure you receive the care you need without the burden of financial responsibilities. Please sit down at the dining table." I followed them into the dining room, where the incident with the fake bag happened the night before. Preston opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He spread them out across the dark wood. There were blue sticky notes indicating where I needed to sign. "This is an updated last will and testament," Kendrick explained, leaning over the table, "and a comprehensive medical power of attorney. It gives me the legal authority to make all medical and financial decisions on your behalf should you become incapacitated." I reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the documents closer. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to spot legal loopholes and hidden clauses in a matter of seconds. I let my eyes scan the dense paragraphs of legalese while pretending to be overwhelmed by the paperwork. It did not take long to find the trap. Buried on page 7 under a section labeled Emergency Medical Directives was a clause explicitly waiving Naomi's right to contest an involuntary psychiatric hold. It granted Kendrick the absolute authority to place her in a long-term care facility without a secondary medical opinion. Then I checked the execution timeline. The documents were drafted to take immediate effect upon filing, and the filing date was set for this Friday. He was not planning to wait. By the end of the week, he intended to have my sister locked inside a padded room permanently. "This means you take everything I said?" my voice quivering. "If I sign this, you control my trust. You control my house." Kendrick sighed heavily, running a hand over his face like a weary martyr. "I am trying to save your life, Naomi. You are sick. You need a secure facility where doctors can monitor you around the clock. If you do not sign this willingly, Mr. Preston will take the security footage of your violent breakdown to a judge tomorrow morning. The court will strip away your rights by force, and it will be a public, humiliating spectacle. I am giving you the chance to do this quietly." I looked up at him, letting a fresh wave of fake tears fill my eyes. I made sure to look entirely broken. He smiled back a cold, victorious smirk. He was soaring on an unbelievable power trip, completely unaware that his arrogance was blinding him to the details. I picked up the heavy brass pen Preston had placed on the table. My hand shook violently as I lowered the tip to the paper. I hovered over the signature line for a brief moment, letting Kendrick savor his triumph. Then I pressed down hard. I did not write Naomi. I wrote Natalie. I signed my actual legal name with the exact same sharp, distinct flourish I used on federal warrants. I pushed the paper toward Preston. The lawyer did not even read the letters. He just saw ink on the designated line. He immediately pulled out his notary stamp and pressed it hard onto the page, sealing the document. "Good girl," Kendrick said, patting my shoulder patronizingly. "You did the right thing." Preston packed the documents back into his briefcase. I will file these with the state registry electronically this evening, he said, snapping the locks shut. And I will mail the physical copies to the county clerk tomorrow morning. I kept my head down, hiding a massive grin. By electronically filing and physically mailing a document bearing a fraudulent signature specifically to seize assets, Preston and Kendrick had just officially crossed the line into federal wire and mail fraud. Every single move they made to trap Naomi was just forging another bar in their own prison cell. They had the paperwork, but I had the checkmate. The front door clicked shut as the lawyer left the house, leaving Kendrick basking in the glow of his supposed victory. They had the paperwork, but I had the checkmate. Kendrick did not say another word to me that evening. He just poured himself a massive glass of expensive bourbon and walked into his office, shutting the heavy door firmly behind him. I walked back upstairs to the master bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. The trap was fully set on my end, but Kendrick was also accelerating his. He was not going to wait until Friday to get me out of the house. He wanted me gone before I could cause any more financial embarrassment. The next morning, my suspicion was confirmed. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I heard Kendrick greet someone in the foyer with a warm, overly familiar tone. Heavy footsteps ascended the sweeping staircase and the bedroom door swung open. It was my mother. Diana walked into the room carrying a large canvas duffel bag. She did not look me in the eye. Instead, she immediately walked over to the massive walk-in closet and began pulling clothes from the hangers. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice small and timid. "I am packing your things, Naomi," she said, her voice clipped and strictly business. She tossed a few oversized sweaters and a pair of sweatpants into the bag. "Kendrick found a wonderful private wellness retreat for you upstate. It is a beautiful facility with round-the-clock medical care. You are going to go there for a few months to rest and get your mind right." She was talking about a psychiatric ward. She was using gentle, sanitized words to describe locking her own daughter inside a mental institution. I watched her perfectly manicured hands fold a pair of socks. She was intentionally choosing the most drab, comfortable clothes, ignoring the designer dresses and expensive jewelry Kendrick had bought over the years. She knew I would not need them where I was going. "I do not want to go to a hospital, Mom," I whispered, putting a slight tremor in my voice. "Please do not let him send me away." Diana let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. She stopped packing and finally looked at me. Her expression was completely devoid of maternal warmth. It was the face of a woman who had convinced herself she was doing the right thing solely because it benefited her. "Stop making this so difficult, Naomi," she scolded, folding her arms across her chest. "You have been acting like a lunatic. You destroyed the living room yesterday. You insulted Kendrick's colleagues. You are sick. Kendrick is spending a fortune to get you the best help possible. You should be down on your knees thanking him instead of crying like a spoiled child. It is for your own good." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and my twin sister. I searched her eyes for any trace of conflict, any hint of guilt. There was nothing but greedy self-preservation. She was willing to throw her daughter into a padded cell to maintain her own comfortable lifestyle. I let the timid facade drop just a fraction. I straightened my posture and let my voice return to its natural calm cadence. "Did he pay off your mortgage for this?" I asked. The question hung in the quiet bedroom. Diana froze. Her hands gripped the handles of the duffel bag so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The color completely drained from her heavily contoured face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I did not need a ledger to know the truth. The timing was too perfect. I had seen the property tax records for her house while investigating Kendrick's shell companies. She had been underwater on a predatory loan for years, and suddenly, she was driving a new Mercedes and actively helping her son-in-law commit her daughter to a mental institution. "He paid off the remaining balance on your house, did he not?" I continued, my voice ice-cold. $240,000. That was the price tag for your daughter. That is what it cost for you to look the other way, while he forged her medical records and stole her trust fund. You sold my freedom so you could keep your house. Diana took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. She was not looking at a terrified, broken Naomi anymore. She was looking at a woman who saw straight through her soul. "You are crazy," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You do not know what you are talking about. I am your mother." "No, you are not," I said smoothly, walking toward her and taking the duffel bag from her shaking hands. "A mother protects her children. You are just a parasite attaching yourself to the biggest bank account in the room. You can stop packing Diana." I called her by her first name. It was the absolute severing of our bond. I did not feel sorrow. I did not feel the crushing heartbreak that my sister Naomi would have felt in this moment. I only felt a clinical, terrifying clarity. I took the bag and tossed it onto the floor. "You need to leave this room right now," I commanded, pointing toward the door. "And when all of this comes crashing down and you realize exactly what you helped him do not ever try to call me your daughter again." Diana backed out of the room, her face pale and her breathing shallow. She turned and practically ran down the hallway. I closed the bedroom door and locked it. The emotional ties were officially cut. I had no family left in this house, and that made me more dangerous than Kendrick could ever possibly imagine. There was nothing holding me back anymore. The board was cleared, and it was time to move in for the kill. The house was quiet for barely an hour after my mother fled. I used that time to organize the final pieces of evidence David had sent over the encrypted server. The trap was primed. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking. Kendrick had left for his corporate office, so he should not be back until evening. I walked out to the landing and looked down the sweeping staircase, expecting to see my arrogant brother-in-law. It was not Kendrick. It was Brittany. She was wearing another skin-tight designer dress and holding a shiny brass key Kendrick must have given her. She did not bother calling out or announcing herself. She just marched up the stairs with the entitled arrogance of a young woman who believed she had already won the ultimate prize. She reached the top of the landing, saw the duffel bag my mother had abandoned in the hallway, and scoffed loudly. "Are you still not packed?" she demanded, crossing her arms and glaring at me. "Kendrick told me you were leaving today for your little hospital retreat. I have decorators coming this afternoon to measure the master suite, so you really need to hurry up and get out of my house." I did not put on the terrified wife act this time. I did not need to. Kendrick was not watching the cameras right now, and even if he was, I was done playing the victim. I casually leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. She was just a 24-year-old girl who thought she had secured a billionaire lifestyle by sleeping with a married man. She had no idea she was strapping herself to a sinking ship. I walked back into the bedroom, picked up a crisp manila envelope from the mattress, and carried it out to the hallway. I held it out to her. "What is this?" she snapped, snatching it from my hand with obvious disgust. "I suggest you read it before you start measuring for custom curtains," I replied, keeping my voice completely neutral and cold. She pulled out the thick stack of papers. The top page was a comprehensive summary of Kendrick's actual financial portfolio. It was not the fabricated numbers he gave the country club or the fake bank statements he showed his investors. It was the cold, hard reality of his toxic debt. "That is a certified financial snapshot," I explained, watching her eyes dart across the page. "Kendrick likes to play the wealthy real estate mogul, but his actual net worth is currently negative $4 million. This mansion you are so eager to redecorate is 2 months behind on the mortgage. The bank foreclosure notice is literally on page 3. "You are lying," she stammered, her voice immediately losing its confident edge. Her eyes widened as she flipped to the 3rd page, seeing the official bank seal and the massive overdue balance. "He just bought me a car. He is taking me to his company gala tomorrow night. He is rich. He is swimming in illegal debt," I corrected her, stepping slightly closer. "And turn to page 5, Brittany. My attorney did a little digging into your background this morning. Did you know Kendrick used your personal information to co-sign a massive commercial loan last month? He told you he was setting up a boutique design firm in your name to help your career, did he not?" Brittany gasped, her face turning completely ashen. How do you know about that? She whispered, taking a step back. Because that is what men like Kendrick do, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They do not shower you with gifts because they love you or respect you. They do it to buy your compliance so they can use you as a financial mule. When the federal agents raid his office this week and the creditors come looking for their millions, they are going to see your signature on those loan documents. He is not leaving this house to you, Brittany. He is leaving you holding the bag, and you already know how he treats women who hold his fake bags. She looked down at the papers, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently. The fantasy of the billionaire lifestyle was crashing down around her in real time. She dropped the envelope onto the floor and pulled her phone out of her purse. Her thumbs flew across the screen as she frantically typed out a message. I did not need to read over her shoulder to know what it said. It was a furious, panicked breakup text demanding he take her name off everything immediately. I am not going to federal prison for him, she cried, her voice cracking with sheer panic. She turned and practically sprinted down the stairs, her high heels echoing loudly in the quiet house. She bolted out the front door, leaving it wide open behind her. I walked slowly down the stairs and closed the heavy oak door, locking it securely. Kendrick was losing his grip on everything. His mother-in-law was terrified his sister was bankrupt, and his precious mistress had just abandoned ship in a blind panic. He was completely isolated, and he did not even know it yet. The stage was perfectly set for tomorrow night, the grand company gala, where he planned to announce his ultimate victory. I smiled walking back upstairs. He wanted to put on a show, and I was going to give him the finale of a lifetime. The next morning dawned with a heavy, oppressive silence. Kendrick had returned late the previous night, slamming doors and throwing a crystal glass against the kitchen wall. I stayed quietly in the locked master bedroom, listening to his muffled rage. He had obviously seen Brittany's texts. His shiny new toy had bolted, and his ego was bruised, but he had no idea about the massive financial avalanche that was about to crush him. He thought he was just dealing with a gold digger getting cold feet. He had absolutely no clue that his entire empire was currently being dismantled brick by the very woman he thought he had locked in a cage. At 8 o'clock, he unlocked my door. He was already dressed in a sharp casual suit, his face tight with controlled fury. He did not mention Brittany. Men like him never admit when they have been discarded. Instead, he focused entirely on the one person he believed he still fully controlled. Me. Tonight is the 10-year anniversary gala for my company, he announced, his voice dangerously quiet. The press will be there, the mayor will be there, and you will be there, Naomi. You are going to put on a beautiful dress, you are going to smile for the cameras, and you are going to stand by my side like a supportive, grateful wife. I sat up in bed, pulling the covers to my chest, acting terrified. And what happens after the gala? I asked, my voice trembling just enough to sound pathetic. He offered a cold, lifeless smile. After my speech, a private medical transport will be waiting at the back entrance of the hotel. They have the legal paperwork you signed. They will escort you directly to the psychiatric facility upstate. Do not try to run. Do not try to make a scene. If you embarrass me tonight, I swear to you, I will make sure you never see the outside of a padded room for the rest of your natural life. I lowered my eyes, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. Okay, Kendrick, I whispered. I will do whatever you want. But please, can I ask for one thing? He rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed by my supposed weakness. What is it now? I looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes. Can I wear the diamond necklace? The one you bought for our anniversary last year? If I'm going away, I just want to feel beautiful for one last night. Kendrick stared at me for a long moment. He was trying to read my expression, but all he saw was a broken, defeated woman clinging to a shiny piece of jewelry. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Fine, he sneered. Wear the damn necklace. It will look good for the photos anyway. It shows everyone how incredibly well I take care of my sick, unstable wife. He turned and left the room, leaving the door wide open. I let out a long, slow breath. Kendrick thought the necklace was just a $50,000 trinket to pacify a hysterical woman. He did not realize I had already traced the serial numbers on those stones. That necklace was purchased directly from a high-end jeweler using a wire transfer from the offshore Cayman holding account, the exact same account he used to siphon Naomi's stolen trust fund. Wearing it tonight was not about looking glamorous. It was about walking into a room full of federal agents, wearing $50,000 of physical stolen evidence wrapped tightly around my neck. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meticulous preparation. A professional hair and makeup team arrived at noon, paid for by Kendrick, to ensure his prop wife looked absolutely flawless for the press. They painted over the fake bruise on my arm and styled my hair into an elegant, sophisticated updo. I sat quietly in the chair, letting them work, playing the role of the docile, obedient spouse. They chattered about the weather and the latest gossip, entirely unaware that they were preparing me for a war zone. By 6 o'clock, I was standing in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom. I was wearing a stunning floor-length black gown that fit perfectly. Kendrick walked into the room holding a black velvet box. He opened it, revealing the dazzling diamond necklace. "Turn around," he commanded. I turned my back to him. I felt the cold, heavy platinum settle against my collarbone as he fastened the clasp. The diamonds caught the light in the room, sparkling brilliantly against my skin. "You look perfect," he whispered in my ear, his breath hot and unpleasant. "Remember the plan, Naomi. Smile, nod, and keep your mouth shut. The ambulance is already booked for 10 o'clock sharp." I looked at our reflection in the mirror. Kendrick looked like a powerful CEO at the top of the world. I looked like a fragile trophy wife trapped in his massive shadow. But beneath the diamonds and the silk, I was a loaded weapon with the safety turned off. "I am ready, Kendrick," I said softly. "Let us go to the gala." We walked down the sweeping staircase together and stepped out into the cool evening air. The black limousine was waiting in the driveway, engine running. The storm was finally here. The ride to the Grand Hotel was suffocating. Kendrick sat on the opposite side of the plush leather seat, staring at his phone. He did not say a single word until the limousine turned onto the main avenue, approaching the massive, brightly lit venue. The street was lined with valet attendants and a swarm of local press. He put his phone away and leaned forward, his face mere inches from mine. "Remember what is at stake tonight, Naomi," he whispered, his voice dangerously low over the hum of the engine. "You are going to step out of this car, and you are going to look at me with absolute adoration. If you flinch, if you cry, if you do anything to embarrass me in front of my investors, the ambulance waiting out back will be the least of your problems. I will make sure the facility keeps you heavily medicated for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" I nodded, keeping my eyes downcast. "Yes, Kendrick, I understand," I whispered. The limousine rolled to a smooth stop. The driver opened the door, and the chaotic flashing of camera lenses immediately flooded the dark interior. Kendrick stepped out first, buttoning his tuxedo jacket and flashing a brilliant, charismatic smile to the crowd. He turned back and offered me his hand, playing the part of the devoted gentleman to absolute perfection. I took his hand and stepped out onto the red carpet. The cool night air hit my bare shoulders, but I did not shiver. I stood tall, the $50,000 diamond necklace catching the intense glare of the camera flashes. I heard murmurs from the crowd and the reporters. I looked breathtaking, and Kendrick knew it. His grip on my hand tightened painfully, squeezing my fingers together as we walked toward the grand entrance. "Keep smiling," he muttered through gritted teeth while waving to a photographer. I offered the cameras a soft, fragile smile. It was the exact expression of a woman trying to hold herself together, which played perfectly into his narrative of my failing mental health. As we moved through the heavy glass doors, the chaotic noise of the press was instantly replaced by the elegant hum of a high society gala. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over dozens of perfectly arranged tables. Waiters carrying silver trays of champagne wove seamlessly through the crowd. The room was packed with the most influential people in the city. Wealthy investors, local politicians, and corporate executives were all gathered to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Kendrick's real estate empire. It was a monument to his ego built entirely on a foundation of stolen money. My eyes scanned the crowd, immediately searching for familiar faces. I spotted my mother standing near the center of the room, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Diana was wearing a stiff silver gown, trying desperately to blend in with the billionaires. But her posture was rigid and her eyes darted nervously around the room. She had not forgotten the terrifying conversation we had the previous morning. She saw me walk in and quickly looked away, taking a large gulp of her drink. Her guilt and panic were practically radiating across the ballroom. Kendrick dragged me from group to group, shaking hands and accepting praise. He introduced me to the mayor and several key board members. Every time he spoke about me, he used a tone of deep, patronizing sympathy. He told them I was feeling a bit under the weather, but he simply could not celebrate this milestone without his beautiful wife by his side. The executives nodded sympathetically, completely buying his performance. But I was not paying attention to the executives. I was systematically scanning the perimeter of the room. And then I saw them, standing casually near the grand marble bar, nursing glasses of sparkling water, were 3 men and 1 woman in tailored evening wear. They looked like wealthy investors, but I knew exactly who they were. The tall man on the left, adjusting his cuffs, was Special Agent Reynolds from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. The woman next to him was a senior investigator from the IRS. They were my colleagues, my backup. I caught Reynolds' eye for a fraction of a second. He did not nod. He did not smile. He simply blinked once and looked away, taking a sip of his water. It was the only signal I needed. The perimeter was secured. The federal warrants were signed and waiting in his jacket pocket. Kendrick pulled me toward the front of the room, where a large stage had been erected. A grand podium stood in the center, flanked by 2 massive projection screens displaying his corporate logo. The time had come. "I will be going up there in 5 minutes," Kendrick whispered, leaning close to my ear. "You are going to sit at the front table next to your mother. When I announce your medical leave of absence, you are going to stand up and smile. Then the security team will escort you directly to the back exit. If you make a single sound, I will ruin you." He let go of my arm and walked toward the stage stairs, straightening his tie. I walked over to the reserved table and sat down next to my mother. The trap was perfectly set. He was about to walk up to that microphone and hand me the match to burn his entire life to the ground. A hush fell over the magnificent ballroom as Kendrick stepped up to the acrylic podium. The spotlight hit him perfectly, illuminating his tailored tuxedo and that $1 million smile he used to charm bankers and investors alike. A thunderous round of applause erupted before he even spoke a single word. He raised his hands in a gesture of humble gratitude, soaking in the adoration of the room. "Thank you all so much," he began, his voice resonating smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. 10 years ago, I stood in a tiny leased office with nothing but a phone, a vision, and a relentless drive to rebuild the skyline of this great city. He spent the next 10 minutes delivering a masterclass in narcissistic storytelling. He listed his fabricated achievements with absolute conviction. He talked about the commercial developments, the residential complexes, and the massive returns he had supposedly secured for everyone sitting in the room. He painted himself as a self-made visionary who single-handedly transformed the local real estate market. The investors nodded along, their eyes shining with greed, completely blind to the fact that every brick of his empire was mortared with offshore shell companies and toxic debt. I sat perfectly still, watching him weave a web of financial lies right in front of federal investigators. Then the charismatic smile slowly faded from his face. He lowered his head, gripping the edges of the podium, as if he needed the acrylic stand to support his physical weight. The lighting in the room subtly dimmed, a theatrical touch he had undoubtedly arranged with the production crew beforehand. "But tonight is not just about celebrating corporate milestones," he continued, his voice dropping an octave heavy with manufactured sorrow. Tonight, I must also share a heavy personal burden. Because as a leader, I believe in absolute transparency with my investors, my partners, and my friends. A heavy, anxious silence settled over the room. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped entirely. "Many of you know my beautiful wife, Naomi," he said, gesturing vaguely toward my table at the front of the stage. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at me. I kept my gaze fixed on my lap, playing the role of the fragile, broken woman. What you do not know is that behind closed doors, our family has been fighting a devastating battle. For the past several months, Naomi has been suffering from a rapid and severe mental decline. He let out a shaky breath, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance of a heartbroken husband. She is battling severe paranoia and terrifying manic delusions. She has suffered from erratic public behavior and violent outbursts in our home. It has reached a point where she is no longer connected to reality. She cannot care for herself, and she certainly cannot manage her own affairs. It has been the most painful experience of my life to watch the woman I love slip away into the darkness of her own mind. I listened to his words, feeling a cold, clinical precision wash over me. He was legally cornering himself on a hot microphone. "That is why, with an incredibly heavy heart, I have made the agonizing decision to step in," he announced, looking out at the crowd with a mask of heroic sacrifice. "For her own physical safety and to protect the financial legacy of her family, I have legally filed to assume full conservatorship over her life and her entire estate." A collective murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience. People were actually wiping away tears. I glanced to my left. My mother Diana was dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. She looked up at Kendrick and nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the tragic, supportive mother-in-law. She was giving his lies her silent public endorsement, solidifying her complicity. She will be entering a private, secure medical facility tonight to get the intensive psychiatric care she so desperately needs. Kendrick concluded, looking directly down at me with cold, dead eyes. "I will be taking on the burden of managing everything so she does not have to worry. Because that is what a real husband does. He protects his wife at all costs." The ballroom erupted into a massive standing ovation. Investors and politicians alike were clapping for a monster, praising him for legally kidnapping his wife and stealing her inheritance. I remained seated, my hands resting quietly on the white tablecloth. I looked over at the bar. Special Agent Reynolds was still standing there watching the applause with a look of absolute disgust on his face. Let Kendrick soak in the cheers. Let him reach the absolute pinnacle of his delusion. The higher he climbed, the harder the impact was going to be. The standing ovation thundered through the massive ballroom. Men in expensive suits and women in designer gowns were on their feet clapping enthusiastically for the man standing at the podium. Kendrick smiled modestly, bowing his head slightly, as if humbled by their support. He was soaking in the absolute pinnacle of his fabricated glory. He thought the show was over. He thought he had successfully manipulated hundreds of the most powerful people in the city into endorsing his hostile takeover of my sister's life. I pushed my chair back, letting the wooden legs scrape loudly against the marble floor. The sound was entirely drowned out by the roaring applause. I stood up slowly, smoothing down the front of my black silk gown. "My mother?" Diana reached out and grabbed my wrist, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into my skin. "Sit down, Naomi," she hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "The medical transport is waiting outside. Do not make a scene." I looked down at her terrified face. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my wrist. "I am not Naomi," I said quietly. "And the scene is just getting started." I turned away from the reserved table and walked confidently toward the side of the stage. The audio engineering table was set up just a few yards away, hidden behind a black velvet curtain. The sound technician was busy adjusting the equalizers, completely distracted by the deafening applause. I stepped behind the table and reached for a spare wireless microphone resting next to the mixing board. The technician looked up startled and tried to physically block me, but I simply gave him a cold, authoritative stare that froze him in his tracks. He stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. I flipped the switch on the microphone. A sharp, high-pitched whine of audio feedback pierced the air, echoing loudly through the massive ballroom speakers. The applause immediately faltered. People covered their ears and looked around in confusion. The clapping died down to an awkward, scattered smattering before silencing completely. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the side of the stage, searching for the source of the painful noise. I stepped out from behind the velvet curtain, holding the microphone tightly in my right hand. The $50,000 diamond necklace sparkled brilliantly under the house lights. I looked directly up at Kendrick, standing frozen behind his acrylic podium. The smug, charismatic smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a look of absolute fury and utter confusion. "You are absolutely right, Kendrick," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear through the quiet room. "Naomi does need protection." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Whispers broke out among the wealthy investors and corporate board members. This was not the broken, terrified woman Kendrick had just described a few seconds ago. My voice was completely steady, carrying a cold, commanding authority that demanded absolute attention. Kendrick gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He leaned into his own microphone. Naomi put the microphone down. He commanded, his voice tight with suppressed rage, disguised as husbandly concern. I took a step forward, walking slowly toward the center of the room. I kept my eyes locked on his, refusing to let him look away. "But she needs protection from you," I finished, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a razor blade. The ballroom erupted into chaotic murmurs. Politicians exchanged nervous glances, setting their champagne glasses down on the tables. Diana covered her mouth with her hands, shrinking back into her chair, trying to make herself invisible. Kendrick quickly recovered his composure, leaning back into the podium. He forced a sad, patronizing laugh that echoed awkwardly through the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so incredibly sorry," he said, shaking his head with a look of manufactured pity. "Please forgive this interruption. As I just explained, my wife is suffering from severe paranoia and manic delusions. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we have been dealing with at home. It breaks my heart that you all have to witness her in this tragic state." He looked past me toward the back of the room and gave a sharp, subtle nod. Instantly, 4 massive security guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows near the exit doors. They began moving quickly through the crowd, heading straight for me. "Please remain calm, everyone," Kendrick continued, his voice oozing with fake sympathy. "My private security team is simply going to escort her safely to the medical transport. It is for her own good. She does not know what she is saying right now." The guards closed in their heavy footsteps, echoing against the marble floor. The audience parted nervously, giving them a clear path to where I stood. To anyone else, this would be the terrifying climax of a nightmare. 4 huge men advancing to drag a woman away to a psychiatric ward against her will. But I did not step back. I did not drop the microphone. I stood perfectly still, my posture rigidly straight, waiting for them to get closer. Kendrick thought brute force could silence me. He thought he could just drag the problem out the back door before the illusion completely shattered. He had no idea that the federal agents standing by the bar were already moving into position, blocking the main exits. I raised the microphone back to my lips, ready to deliver the final fatal blow to his empire. I raised the microphone back to my lips, ready to deliver the final fatal blow to his empire. But before I could speak a single word, a deafening crash echoed from the back of the room. The heavy brass handles of the grand double doors were thrown open with such violent force that they slammed against the marble walls. The 4 security guards who had been advancing toward me instantly stopped in their tracks. Everyone in the ballroom turned around, their eyes wide with shock. Standing perfectly framed in the massive doorway was my twin sister. It was the real Naomi. But she was not the broken, terrified woman Kendrick had forced her to be for 13 years. She looked like an absolute queen. She was wearing a stunning, tailored emerald green suit that radiated power and confidence. Her posture was straight, her chin was held high, and her eyes were burning with a fierce, unyielding fire. she did not come alone. Flanking her on her right was David, my ruthless financial attorney from New York, holding a thick leather briefcase. On her left was a team of 3 elite private security contractors. They were not the cheap bouncers Kendrick hired. They were highly trained professionals whose mere presence commanded absolute authority. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Hundreds of wealthy investors and politicians started whispering frantically, pointing back and forth between the woman standing at the back of the room and the woman standing near the stage. To them, it was an impossible sight. 2 identical faces, 2 identical women, but projecting 2 entirely different auras of power. The confusion was palpable as the guests tried to comprehend the bizarre reality unfolding before their very eyes. I kept my eyes locked on Kendrick. The transformation on his face was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. The arrogant, charismatic smirk melted away completely. His skin turned a sickening shade of gray. His eyes darted wildly from me to Naomi and back again. His jaw actually dropped open, but no sound came out. For the first time in his entire miserable life, he was completely and utterly speechless. He gripped the acrylic podium so hard his knuckles turned stark white, but it was no longer a gesture of power. He was holding on to it because his knees were physically buckling under the immense weight of his suddenly shattered reality. My mother Diana let out a high-pitched shriek. I looked down at the front table to see her clutching her chest, her face frozen in absolute terror. She stared at me, looking at the cold, calculated expression on my face, and then looked back at Naomi walking down the aisle. The realization hit her like a freight train. She finally understood why I had been so cold, so clinical, and so completely unaffected by her toxic manipulation. She knew she had made a fatal mistake by crossing the wrong twin. Naomi began her slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her, instantly stepping back as if she carried a loaded weapon. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing loudly in the silent room. Her security detail moved in perfect sync with her, easily pushing past Kendrick's hired guards who were too confused to intervene. David walked right up to the front table and casually dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the white tablecloth right next to my hyperventilating mother. The loud thud made Diana jump out of her seat. Kendrick finally found his voice. It was not the booming, confident baritone he used for his speeches. It was a weak, trembling croak. "What is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "What is going on here? Security, get her out of here. Both of them right now." His guards hesitated entirely, unsure of what to do. "You do not have the authority to remove anyone, Kendrick," Naomi said, her voice ringing out clear and strong without the need for a microphone. It was a voice I had not heard in years. It was the voice of the fierce, independent sister I grew up with, before he systematically broke her down. She stopped just a few feet away from the podium, looking up at the man who had tormented her for over a decade. "You told these people I was crazy." Naomi continued, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "You told them I was having manic delusions and violent outbursts. You told them I needed to be locked away so you could protect my estate." Kendrick swallowed, hard sweat beading on his forehead. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Let us just go home and talk about this in private. We are never going back to that house," Naomi replied, her tone completely devoid of mercy. "You thought you could erase me. You thought you could take everything I had and throw me in a cage. But you made one massive miscalculation." She turned her head slightly and looked right at me. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. "You forgot about my sister." I lifted the microphone back to my lips. The terrified, submissive posture I had maintained for a month vanished in an instant. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and let the cold, calculating professional I truly was step into the light. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Everyone was waiting for the punchline of a joke they did not understand. "For the last 4 weeks, Kendrick, why have not been your wife?" I announced, my voice echoing with a sharp, commanding edge that made him flinch physically. "I am not the woman you beat. I am not the woman you locked in a bedroom. And I am certainly not the woman whose trust fund you spent the last decade bleeding dry. A shattering crash broke the silence. My mother Diana had dropped her crystal flute of champagne. It shattered against the marble floor, sending shards of glass and expensive liquor everywhere. She let out a piercing, horrified scream, stumbling backward into her chair. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. She finally realized that the daughter she had just abandoned to a psychiatric ward was the one with the power to send her to prison. "My name is Natalie," I continued, ignoring the chaotic gasps spreading through the crowd. "I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government specializing in corporate fraud and money laundering, and for the past month I have been conducting a covert on-site audit of your entire life, Kendrick." Kendrick gripped his podium so tightly, the acrylic cracked under the pressure. "No," he breathed, shaking his head frantically. "No, that is impossible. You are Naomi. You look exactly like her. You act exactly like her. This is a trick. This is one of your crazy manic episodes. Security, get these women out of my building right now." But the security guards were already stepping back, raising their hands in surrender. Special Agent Reynolds and his team of federal investigators had moved forward from the bar, flashing their gold badges to the hired muscle. The guards immediately stood down, wanting absolutely no part of a federal raid. The investors in the room began muttering aggressively, realizing they were attending a crime scene. "You are so blinded by your own narcissism, Kendrick, that you could not even tell the difference," I said, taking a few steps closer to the stage. "You never looked at Naomi. You only looked at what she could do for you. You did not notice that the woman cooking your dinner had a different cadence in her voice. You did not notice that her handwriting had changed on the grocery lists. You were so utterly obsessed with breaking her spirit that you never realized you were trying to break a federal investigator." Naomi stepped forward, joining me at the front of the stage. We stood side by side, identical in our features, but completely different in our presence. Naomi looked at the man who had tormented her for 13 years. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two faces of his destruction stared him down. "You thought I was weak, Kendrick?" Naomi said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "You thought because I cried when you yelled that I would never fight back. But I did the one thing you never expected. I called my sister, and we decided it was time to let you dig your own grave. You have nothing on me," Kendrick shouted, his voice echoing with sheer desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face pale and sweating. "You came into my house under false pretenses. That is illegal. Any evidence you think you have is inadmissible in court. I am a respected CEO. You are just an angry sister trying to ruin my reputation. I have the best lawyers in this state. I will crush both of you." I smiled a cold, merciless smile. "You are right about one thing, Kendrick. You did have the best lawyers. But as of an hour ago, your primary counsel, Mr. Preston, resigned. He found out about the fraudulent signatures you made him notarize yesterday and decided he did not want to lose his license to practice law. He is currently sitting in an interrogation room cutting a plea deal." I turned to the audio technician hiding behind the velvet curtain. He was still frozen, staring at the drama unfolding on the floor. I snapped my fingers, pointing to the massive projection screens hanging behind Kendrick. "Run the file David sent you," I commanded. The technician scrambled to his computer, hitting a few keys. The giant screens behind Kendrick flickered to life. The massive corporate logo vanished entirely. In its place, the undeniable proof of his crimes appeared, illuminating the stage in a harsh white light. The trap was finally springing shut. The harsh white light from the massive screens washed over the stunned faces of the audience. Displayed in high definition for every major investor and politician to see were the internal ledgers of Kendrick's offshore holding companies. I had not just projected a few bank statements. I projected the entire unredacted history of his financial parasitism. There were wire transfers routing millions of dollars from Naomi's protected trust fund into fake corporate accounts in the Cayman Islands. Next to those were the predatory loan agreements he had secretly taken out using his sister Jasmine's stolen identity. The ballroom was dead silent, except for the low hum of the projectors. People were reading the numbers, The politicians who had just applauded him were now physically backing away from their tables, distancing themselves from a sinking ship. Wealthy investors who had poured their life savings into his commercial developments stared at the screens in absolute horror, realizing their money was gone. I looked down at Kendrick. His eyes were wide, glued to the screens above him. He was watching a decade of meticulous fraud broadcasted live to the exact people he needed to impress. "You tried to steal Naomi's trust by declaring her insane?" I said, my voice projecting powerfully across the room. "You hired a disgraced doctor to fabricate a medical history. You drafted a fraudulent power of attorney, and you tried to lock my sister in a psychiatric ward so you could quietly drain her inheritance to cover your massive corporate debts." Kendrick shook his head desperately, holding his hands up toward the crowd. "These are forged," he yelled, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. She hacked my servers and altered the documents. Do not look at this." Nobody listened to him. The evidence was too detailed, too precise. "You thought you had the perfect plan, Kendrick." I continued, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "You thought you could just bully a terrified woman into signing away her entire life. But you were so arrogant, so completely drunk on your own perceived power, that you failed to realize one crucial detail." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. I pointed to the right side of the screen, where a magnified image of the last will and testament he had forced me to sign the previous night appeared. "Every single document you forced me to sign over the last 4 weeks was signed under my legal name," I declared. "I did not forge Naomi's signature once. You took documents bearing the signature of a federal investigator, and you submitted them electronically to financial institutions across state lines." Kendrick stared at the magnified signature on the screen. The distinct sharp flourish of my name, Natalie, was clearly visible. The color drained from his face entirely, as the legal reality of what I was saying finally penetrated his thick skull. "By submitting those documents, you committed federal wire fraud and identity theft," I explained, my voice cold and unyielding. "And because you used those forged documents to attempt a hostile takeover of a multi-million-dollar trust fund, you elevated it to a Class B federal felony. You did not trap Naomi. You handed the federal government a perfectly wrapped conviction on a silver platter." The absolute finality of the trap finally snapped the last remaining thread of Kendrick's sanity. The wealthy, composed real estate mogul vanished entirely. In his place was a cornered animal, realizing there was no way out. "You ruined me!" he roared, a primal, guttural sound of pure rage. He lunged forward. He did not run toward the exit to escape. He charged directly toward the stage, his hands outstretched, his face twisted in violent fury. He intended to physically drag me off the platform and silence me with his bare hands. He barely made it 3 steps. Before his foot could even touch the first wooden stair leading up to the stage, Special Agent Reynolds moved with terrifying speed. Reynolds lunged from the side, intercepting Kendrick with a brutal professional tackle that sent them both crashing hard onto the marble floor. The sickening thud of Kendrick's shoulder hitting the ground echoed through the ballroom. "Stay down!" Reynolds barked, pressing his knee firmly into Kendrick's back and pinning his arms. 2 more undercover agents rushed forward from the crowd, drawing their federal weapons and pointing them directly at Kendrick's hired security team, who had already backed away with their hands raised. The ballroom erupted into screams and shouts as the guests scrambled away from the physical altercation. My mother Diana shrieked, covering her face and cowering behind her chair. Kendrick thrashed wildly against the marble floor, screaming curses and fighting against the agent's grip. "Get off me!" he bellowed, his face pressed against the cold stone. "I am Kendrick Wright. You cannot do this to me. I own this city. You do not own anything anymore," Naomi said, stepping forward to the edge of the stage and looking down at the pathetic man writhing on the floor. Her voice was remarkably calm, entirely devoid of the fear he had instilled in her for 13 years. "You are just a criminal who finally ran out of victims." Reynolds pulled a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The sharp metallic click of the cuffs locking tightly around Kendrick's wrists sounded louder than any applause he had received that night. The trap was fully closed. The predator was finally in chains. Kendrick twisted his head, scraping his cheek against the cold marble floor. He glared up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You think this changes anything?" He spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of physical pain and arrogant defiance. "You think a pair of federal handcuffs means you win? I am still the chief executive officer of this empire. I control the holding companies. I control the real estate portfolio. I have a team of the best corporate defense attorneys in the state on retainer. They will have me out on bail before midnight. I will tie you both up in civil litigation for the next 20 years. I have millions of dollars, and you are just a government employee." I stepped down from the wooden stairs of the stage and walked slowly toward him. Naomi followed closely by my side. The heavy silence in the ballroom was broken only by the frantic whispering of the investors who were rapidly realizing their money was tied to the man currently pinned to the floor. I crouched down so my face was just a few feet away from his. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, measured tone of an auditor delivering a final financial assessment. "You do not control anything, Kendrick," I said. "You do not even control the suit you are wearing right now." He sneered, flashing his teeth like a cornered dog. "My name is on the bank accounts, Natalie. You cannot touch corporate funds without a judge ordering an asset seizure, and that takes months." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "It takes months if you are fighting a standard civil dispute," I corrected him. "But it takes exactly 72 hours when a federal investigator files a priority suspicious activity report regarding international money laundering. Remember last Tuesday, Kendrick? Remember when you canceled the household credit cards and froze the grocery delivery accounts just to watch me beg you for $50? His eyes flickered with a brief flash of recognition. "You thought you were breaking my spirit through financial starvation," I continued. "But while you were sitting in your office feeling like a god, I drove straight to the regional hub of your primary bank. I used my federal credentials to flag every single one of your offshore Cayman accounts. I gave them the exact routing numbers you had hidden in your wall safe." Kendrick stopped thrashing. His body went completely rigid under Agent Reynolds' knee. The arrogant fire in his eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by the cold, dawning horror of complete financial ruin. "Once the federal freeze hit your accounts, it triggered an automatic default clause on all your commercial loans," I explained, watching his breathing become shallow and erratic. "And because my legal team spent the last month quietly buying up all your toxic debt through an anonymous Delaware holding company, I legally became your primary creditor. You defaulted on me, Kendrick." I stood back up, smoothing down my black silk gown. "Which means earlier this afternoon my attorneys filed the paperwork to seize your entire portfolio. We liquidated your remaining domestic assets and used the funds to completely pay off the $3 million in predatory debt you dumped on your sister Jasmine. We cleared her name entirely using your stolen money." "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ballroom chandeliers. "You cannot do that. That is my money. I earned that money." "You stole that money," Naomi interjected, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You stole it from my trust, you stole it from your investors, and you stole it from your own sister. And now it is gone. You have exactly $0 to your name." "Kendrick," I concluded, looking down at him with absolute disgust, "the mansion you locked me in is in foreclosure. The luxury cars are being seized by the IRS for tax evasion. The corporate bank accounts are frozen by the federal government. You cannot afford a defense attorney. You cannot even afford to post bail. You are completely and utterly bankrupt." The reality of his situation finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his massive ego. The powerful real estate mogul who had commanded the room just 20 minutes ago began to hyperventilate. He let out a pathetic whimpering sound, burying his face against the cold marble floor. The wealthy investors who had been standing nearby heard every single word of our conversation. A sudden wave of sheer panic swept through the crowd. Men in expensive tuxedos began pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their brokers and wealth managers. They were desperate to pull their funds from Kendrick's collapsed empire before the federal government seized whatever was left. The grand 10-year anniversary gala had officially transformed into the scene of the largest corporate collapse in the history of the city. Kendrick was getting a front-row seat to his own absolute destruction. Agent Reynolds grabbed Kendrick by the collar of his expensive suit and hauled him roughly to his feet. Kendrick's legs wobbled. He could barely stand. He looked around the room searching for a single sympathetic face. But the politicians had already turned their backs and his investors were screaming into their phones. He had absolutely no one left. His panicked gaze darted wildly across the sea of disgusted faces until it finally landed on the front table. My mother was still cowering behind her chair, her silver gown shimmering under the ballroom lights. Kendrick locked eyes with her, and a desperate glimmer of hope flashed across his ruined face. "Diana!" he shouted, his voice cracking as the federal agents held him firmly by the arms. "Tell them, Diana. Tell them the truth. Tell them Naomi has been losing her mind. Tell them you agreed to the medical facility. You know I was just trying to help her." The entire ballroom fell completely silent again. Every single person turned to look at my mother. The wealthy politicians, the furious investors, and the hungry press all stared at the woman Kendrick had just publicly named as his accomplice. Diana froze like a deer caught in headlights. She looked at Kendrick, begging her for salvation. Then she looked at Naomi, standing tall and untouchable on the stage. Finally, she looked at me, the federal investigator who already held the mortgage papers, proving she had sold her daughter for a luxury car. She knew exactly what would happen if she uttered a single word in his defense. "I do not know what you are talking about," Diana cried out, her voice shrill and trembling with sheer panic. She took several large steps backward, knocking over a chair in her desperation to distance herself from him. "You lied to me, Kendrick. You manipulated me. I thought you were a good husband, but you are a monster. I had absolutely nothing to do with your finances or your medical lies. Keep me out of this." Kendrick stared at her, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock. The woman who had happily accepted his bribes and praised his cruelty just hours ago had completely thrown him to the wolves. The last pillar of his delusion crumbled into dust. "You hypocrite," he screamed, struggling uselessly against the steel handcuffs. "You took my money. You took the car. You helped me pack her bags." "That is enough," Reynolds barked, giving Kendrick a sharp jerk that silenced him instantly. "Kendrick Wright, you are under arrest for suspicion of federal wire fraud, identity theft, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda rights echoed clearly across the ballroom. The local reporters who had been invited to cover a glorious corporate anniversary were now scrambling over each other to get the perfect shot. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, illuminating Kendrick's tear-stained face and the heavy steel cuffs binding his wrists. This was the front-page story of the decade. The untouchable real estate mogul exposed as a complete fraud and dragged out of his own party by the FBI. "You have the right to an attorney." Reynolds continued, his voice calm and professional over the chaotic noise of the press. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. And considering we just seized every single asset you own, you are definitely going to need a public defender." Kendrick did not fight anymore. The fight was entirely drained out of him. His shoulders slumped forward and his head hung low. The bespoke tuxedo that was supposed to symbolize his immense power now just looked like a ridiculous costume on a broken man. "Let us go," Reynolds commanded. The federal agents flanked him on both sides and began marching him down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd of wealthy elites parted instantly, refusing to even let the fabric of his suit brush against them. The silence of the guests was replaced by the aggressive shouting of the press corps. Reporters shoved microphones toward his face, demanding statements, asking how long he had been stealing from his wife, asking if his entire company was a sham. Kendrick kept his eyes glued to the marble floor. He did not say a word. He just let the agents drag him toward the grand exit. I stood on the stage next to Naomi, watching him take the longest walk of his life. He had spent 13 years building a prison for my sister, isolating her, breaking her confidence, and treating her like a piece of property. Now he was heading to a very real prison. Federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft carried mandatory minimums. With the sheer volume of evidence we had secured, he was looking at a minimum of 20 years behind bars. He would be an old man before he ever tasted freedom again. The heavy double doors of the ballroom closed behind him, shutting out the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters. The monster was gone. The room was left in a state of absolute shock, but for the first time in over a decade, my sister was finally breathing free air. The heavy double doors of the ballroom closed behind him, shutting out the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters. The monster was gone. The room was left in a state of absolute shock, but for the first time in over a decade, my sister was finally breathing free air. The investors and politicians, realizing the absolute toxicity of the situation, began to scatter. Nobody wanted to be associated with Kendrick Wright or his fraudulent empire anymore. They practically sprinted for the exits, leaving their expensive champagne untouched on the white tablecloths. Naomi and I stood on the stage watching the illusion completely crumble. I looked at my sister. The heavy burden she had carried for 13 years was visibly lifting from her shoulders. But there was one last piece of dead weight she needed to cut loose. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of silver silk. My mother Diana was frantically pushing her way through the remaining stragglers. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, and her makeup was heavily smudged from her earlier panic. She practically threw herself at the base of the stage stairs, looking up at Naomi with wide, desperate eyes. She did not look at me. She knew I was a lost cause. She thought she could still manipulate the fragile daughter she had spent years tearing down. Naomi. Oh, my sweet, beautiful Naomi. Diana cried out, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. She scrambled up the wooden stairs and reached out to grab my sister's hands. I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea. You have to believe me. He lied to me just like he lied to everyone else. He told me you were sick and he was getting you the best doctors. I thought I was helping you. I stood a few feet away, keeping my face completely neutral. I could have stepped in. I could have verbally destroyed Diana right then and there using the mortgage documents in my briefcase. But I did not say a single word. This was not my battle to fight anymore. This was Naomi's moment. I watched my twin sister look down at the woman who had happily handed her over to a monster. Naomi did not pull her hands away immediately. She let Diana hold them, looking directly into our mother's tear-filled eyes. Diana sobbed louder, thinking her performance was working. She squeezed Naomi's hands tightly. "We are victims, Naomi," Diana wailed. "Both of us. That awful man manipulated our family. But we have each other now. We can get through this together. You can come stay with me at the house until you get back on your feet." Naomi's expression did not soften. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a profound, exhausted pity. She slowly and deliberately pulled her hands out of Diana's grasp. She took a step back, standing tall and unyielding in her emerald green suit. "Stop acting, Mom," Naomi said. Her voice was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm. "You knew exactly who he was. You knew exactly what he was doing to me behind closed doors because I came to you begging for help 5 years ago, and you told me to go back home and be a better wife." Diana gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "I did not understand how bad it was," she pleaded, taking a step forward. "I was just trying to keep your marriage together." "You were trying to keep your bank account full," Naomi corrected her sharply. "You watched him break me down year after year. You watched him isolate me. And when he finally decided to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal my inheritance, you gladly packed my bags because he paid off your mortgage. You sold me out for a Mercedes. Do not ever contact me or my children again." The absolute finality of the statement struck Diana like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her face contorting in genuine panic. "Naomi, please, you cannot mean that," she begged, her voice cracking. "I am your mother. You are my daughter. You cannot just cut me out of your life. What am I supposed to do? You are going to do exactly what you have always done, Naomi replied, turning her back on the sobbing woman. You are going to look out for yourself. Because from this second forward, you have no daughters left. Naomi looked over at me and nodded. It was over. We walked down the opposite side of the stage, flanked by David and the private security team. We did not look back. We walked across the massive marble floor of the ballroom, heading toward the front exit. The remaining guests parted for us, giving us a wide berth of absolute respect. Behind us, Diana collapsed onto the wooden stairs of the stage. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. But nobody rushed over to comfort her. The waiters ignored her. The few remaining investors looked at her with pure disgust. She had spent her entire life chasing wealth and status, sacrificing her own flesh and blood to secure a place among the elite. And now she was sitting completely alone in an empty ballroom, stripped of her family, her dignity, and her future. The toxic cycle was finally broken. The toxic cycle was finally broken. 6 months passed since that night at the Grand Hotel ballroom. The dust had finally settled, but the impact of that single evening completely reshaped the landscape of our lives. The frantic adrenaline that had fueled my covert operations slowly faded, giving way to a profound and quiet peace. The pacing of our world slowed down, allowing us to finally breathe without looking over our shoulders. I watched Kendrick's absolute downfall from a comfortable distance, reviewing the federal court updates from my office in New York. The arrogant real estate mogul, who once believed he owned the city, was currently wearing an orange jumpsuit. He was decisively denied bail during his arraignment. The federal judge deemed him an extreme flight risk due to his extensive knowledge of offshore banking and his history of manipulating legal documents. He was remanded to a federal detention center awaiting trial. The high-powered corporate defense attorneys he had loudly bragged about completely abandoned him the exact moment his bank accounts were frozen. Without his stolen wealth, he was nothing. He was assigned an overworked public defender who immediately advised him to take a plea deal, but Kendrick was still too infected by his own narcissism to admit defeat. He insisted on taking his case to trial, which only meant my colleagues at the FBI and the IRS were going to bury him under a mountain of undeniable physical evidence. He was looking at a minimum of 25 years in a maximum security federal prison. His massive real estate empire was completely dismantled and auctioned off piece by piece to compensate the investors he had ruthlessly defrauded. One of the people who received compensation was his own sister Jasmine. She had learned a brutal, terrifying lesson about blind loyalty and the true nature of her brother. After the gala, the angry creditors initially came after her, just as I had warned her they would. She was facing absolute financial ruin. But my attorney David and I stepped in. I used the corporate debt my anonymous holding company had purchased to systematically untangle her name from Kendrick's fraudulent shell companies. It took weeks of meticulous legal maneuvering and extensive audits, but we successfully proved to the federal government that she was an unwitting victim of identity theft. We cleared her credit history and saved her from bankruptcy. Jasmine did not return to her country club luncheons or her arrogant socialite lifestyle. The experience deeply and permanently humbled her. She took the small amount of clean money she had left and started a legitimate, modest consulting business, completely independent from her brother's toxic influence. She sent Naomi a long, handwritten letter last month. She expressed profound regret for the horrible things she had said over the years and thanked us for saving her life when we had every right to let her drown. Naomi did not reply to the letter, but I saw her place it carefully in her desk drawer. My mother, Diana, experienced a much harsher and entirely deserved reality. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division did exactly what I told her they would do in that pristine kitchen. They aggressively audited the luxury car dealership, traced the illicit funds directly to Kendrick, and seized the brand-new silver Mercedes straight out of her driveway. Without Kendrick funneling stolen money to pay her massive mortgage, the bank swiftly foreclosed on her suburban home. She was forced to pack her expensive designer clothes into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. Her wealthy social circle, the superficial women she had spent decades trying to desperately impress, completely and utterly shunned her. In their ruthless world, associating with the publicly disgraced accomplice of a federal criminal was absolute social suicide. Her calls to her country club friends went completely unanswered. She tried reaching out to us a few times, leaving desperate crying voicemails begging for financial help and claiming she was practically starving. She tried to use the same old manipulation tactics, hoping to guilt us into saving her. Naomi simply changed her phone number and never listened to the messages. I blocked her number entirely without a second thought. Diana was finally living the exact nightmare she had tried to force onto her own daughter. She was entirely alone, trapped in a miserable, impoverished situation of her own making, with absolutely nobody coming to rescue her. The justice they received was perfectly poetic. Kendrick, the man who wanted to lock his wife in a tiny room, was now permanently locked inside a cold federal cell. Diana, the woman who cared only about appearances, was now completely invisible to the society she worshipped. They were serving sentences perfectly tailored to their own specific sins. She had chosen wealth over her family, and in the end, she lost both. It is a beautiful, crisp Tuesday morning in Manhattan. The air up here is clean, and the sounds of the city below are just a distant, energetic hum. I am standing on the sprawling glass balcony of a breathtaking penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The sunlight catches the edges of the skyline, painting the world in bright, hopeful colors. It is a stark contrast to the dark, suffocating walls of the mansion where this story began. I take a sip of my dark roast coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. Next to me, sitting at a sleek glass patio table, is Naomi. I look at my twin sister, and I am struck by the sheer magnitude of her transformation. She is not wearing oversized drab sweaters to hide imaginary flaws. She is wearing a vibrant emerald silk robe that catches the morning breeze. Her posture is relaxed. Her shoulders are dropped, and her face is absolutely glowing with a healthy, radiant confidence. The heavy, dark circles that used to sit under her eyes are completely gone. The terrified victim Kendrick created has been entirely erased, and the brilliant, strong woman she was always meant to be has returned. Resting on the glass table in front of her is a thick stack of legal documents. But these are not fraudulent loan applications or fake psychiatric evaluations. These are the final, absolute decrees of her divorce. Because Kendrick is currently residing in a federal detention center, awaiting a criminal trial, he has absolutely no leverage left. His public defender advised him not to contest the divorce, as any further legal battles would only highlight his financial abuse to the criminal judge. He signed the papers from a plastic table in a visiting room wearing an orange jumpsuit. Naomi picks up a heavy silver pen. She looks at the signature line for a long, quiet moment. There is no hesitation in her hand this time. There is no fear. She presses the pen to the paper and signs her name with a beautiful, sweeping script. It is the signature of a woman who completely owns her life, her choices, and her future. She sets the pen down and lets out a long, deep breath. "It is done," she says, her voice clear and steady. I smile, raising my coffee mug in a silent toast. "It is done," I echo. "And the trust fund." She smiles back, a genuine, bright expression that reaches all the way to her eyes. "David called an hour ago," she confirms. "The federal government officially released the repatriated funds from the Cayman accounts. Every single dollar has been deposited into the new ironclad trust. And this time, I am the sole trustee. Nobody can ever touch it without my direct authorization. I am actually thinking about taking a portion of the returns and starting a foundation to help women escape financial abuse." "That is a brilliant idea," I tell her, leaning against the glass railing. "You survived the absolute worst of it, Naomi. Now you get to write the rest of the story exactly how you want it." She stands up and walks over to the railing, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. She looks out over the massive, sprawling city, taking in the endless possibilities. I could not have written this chapter without you, Natalie, she says softly. You walked into a cage so I could fly out of it. I will never be able to thank you enough. You do not owe me any thanks, I reply, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. That is what real family does. We protect each other. I look out at the skyline, feeling a profound sense of closure. If there is one thing this entire ordeal has taught me, it is that the traditional definition of family is fundamentally flawed. Society tells us that blood is an unbreakable bond, that we must endure toxic behavior simply because we share genetics with our abusers. We are taught to keep the peace, to stay quiet, and to sacrifice our own well-being to protect the fragile egos of the people who are supposed to love us the most. But that is a lie. Family is not blood. Family is respect. Family is the consistent choice to show up, to value, and to protect one another. If someone uses your love as a weapon against you, they forfeit the right to call you family. And sometimes, to save the people you truly love, you have to stop trying to fix a broken dynamic. Sometimes the only way to survive is to burn the toxic empire to the ground entirely and build a beautiful new one from the ashes. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family member or escape a relationship that was designed to break you down, I want you to know that your worth was never determined by their inability to value you. You have the power to rewrite your own ending. Thank you so much for listening to our story today. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and justice. Let me know in the comments below how you found the strength to rebuild your own life after a betrayal. Remember, you are never trapped, and it is never too late to take your power back. Until next time, stay strong and always trust your instincts. The story of Natalie and Naomi serves as a powerful masterclass in dismantling one of society's most dangerous misconceptions, the idea that blood ties obligate you to endure abuse. For too long, the narrative that family is everything has been weaponized by toxic individuals to maintain control, demand unearned loyalty, and silence their victims. We see this perfectly mirrored in the character of Diana, a mother who willingly sacrificed her own daughter's sanity and freedom just to maintain a facade of wealth and comfort. The most profound lesson we can extract from this saga is that family is not an unconditional life sentence. It is a privilege built entirely on a foundation of mutual respect and safety. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the very monsters you need protection from, walking away is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Naomi's journey reminds us that staying in a poisonous environment out of guilt or obligation only allows the poison to spread. You do not owe your peace of mind to someone who constantly attempts to destroy it, regardless of whether they share your last name or your DNA. Sometimes finding your true worth requires you to burn the toxic empire to the ground and walk away from the ashes without looking back. Healing begins the exact moment you realize that your boundaries are non-negotiable and that you have the absolute right to curate who gets access to your life. True family will never ask you to shrink yourself to keep them comfortable. If you are currently holding on to a relationship that drains your spirit just because of history or biology, take a step back today and ask yourself if the cost of their presence is your peace.